Hey guys, I'm Zach Bowman, reformed automotive journalist. I used to write for all sorts of automotive magazines. I'm here in Fontana, North Carolina to drive a car that I have known for a long time, but it's a little bit different these days. So if you guys have been following the Flyin Miata YouTube channel, you know this car. This is Nancy. This has been in the fleet for a really long time. It started as a press car before they sort of adopted it, and it's been through all sorts of permutations. I met this car 14 years ago. When it was dolled up for the Targa Newfoundland, and that's when I met a bunch of the Flyin Miata crew. They very graciously invited me out to ride right seat and navigate for Brandon Fitch as they competed in the Grand Touring class in the Targa Newfoundland. That trip changed my life in all sorts of ways. You know, I'd always been sort of Miata curious. That was the first time I really understood what these cars are, why they're special, why people love them the way they do. It was not long after that my wife and I bought a 2006 NC of our own, which, you know, changed our lives. I've had a pile of Miatas since then, and I'm super excited to see that this car is still in Flyin Miata's fleet. You know, there was some talk of it going away, but the guys have really dug in and created a new turbo package for this car that has apparently changed it considerably. Let's find out what that means. This car has changed a lot since the last time I saw it. For one thing, it was purple and white and black, which the jokes write themselves when you've got two dudes stuck in a car for 5 days that's purple and white. But more importantly, it's rocking Flyin Miata's new NC turbo kit. You know, Flyin Miata got its start with turbo kits on NAs, and you know, these days there are a billion different ways to turbocharge any vehicle. Cheap parts out of China, tuning's never been easier, all the rest of that stuff. Where Flyin Miata has always sort of shown and stood out has been refinement. You know, I'm fourth gear, 2,000-ish RPM, and you know, if you didn't tell me otherwise, I would not know that this is a turbocharged car. The fueling is beautiful. You know, it's nice and quiet, and then you just roll on it. And there's power. You know, the guys say you're looking at about an extra 100 horsepower over what you have stock. If you'd put a gun to my head previously and said, hey Zach, does an NC Miata need an extra 100 horsepower? I'd have been like, oh man, not really. You know, that's kind of not what Miatas do. But it doesn't hurt. This is really linear, I gotta say. You know, the other amazing part that Flyin Miata manages to pull off, this has got their Fox suspension with the, I think they called it the track package. The springs are a little bit stiffer, but they don't beat you to death. You know, this thing isn't slammed. You know, you've still got decent sidewall. I think it's on like 300 treadwear hand cooks. It still feels like a Miata. It feels like a car that you could drive all the time, which to me, that's what makes the NC so great, right? You know, yeah, the NAs, NBs, NDs are all very pure cars, and I will always tell people, yeah, you can daily drive any of those three, but the NC is a slightly more mature car. There's more room. I mean, my wife and I, when we had our 06, we did 1,100 miles in a day going out west for the Miata reunion. She was 4 months pregnant and was happy, or at least she told me she was happy, and we're not divorced, so we're gonna call that a win. Number one, you can tell almost immediately when you drive a car, first 10 feet or so, whether it's a good vehicle or not, just in general. NC has always had that. The amazing part is for FM to have touched as many parts on this car as they have, there isn't really a compromise you've got to make here, you know? Oh. Beautifully balanced, wants to pivot, wants to rotate, wants to be playful. You know, that's the other mistake I think a lot of people can make with a Miata of any ilk is too much grip, right? These are low power cars. I mean, even with this turbo kit where you've got an extra 100 ponies over factory, you know, you're not talking 400, 500 horsepower. This is still, you know, Camry level power. And when you throw a bunch of tire and a bunch of grip at one of these things, it really ruins the experience. This is fun. This is playful. And we're not breaking any laws, we're not, endangering anybody, we're just having a good time, and that's all right. The other thing I'm realizing driving this thing is that I can feel the dollar bills flying out of my savings account. This is gonna be a problem. This car is lovely, it really is. And again, it's not overwhelming power, you're not waiting on crazy lag. You're not worried about breaking the rear loose at any time. It's just right. And that is the thing that Flyin Miata has excelled at for a long time, even with their V8 cars. You think a big honkin' LS of some flavor is going to be just too much in a Miata, and it's always been just right. I mean, truly Goldilocks stuff. In a lot of ways, that's always made reviewing their cars, Flyin Miata's cars, kind of difficult, right? Because everybody wants to know, all right, well, what sucks about it? You're always sort of working against the Miata stigma. I think that's probably less true now that the internet has sort of woken up to just how good these cars can be. But it's not a 911. To me, I would rather have something like this. For a long time, one of my absolute top tier cars was Betty, Atomic Betty, the V8 NC that FM built a few years back. Absolutely adore that car. It feels like a modern AC Cobra in all the best ways. The problem is stuffing a V8 in an NC isn't cheap. This kit costs less than I would say mediocre NA, right? So to me, this is probably one of the best deals in performance driving going. That's always been true of Miatas in general, but I think an NC with this turbo kit, I mean, what more do you want? So funny, adding power to a car is a dangerous thing, right? All of a sudden, everything else on the car, every other system has to match, keep up. Otherwise, you're gonna have a kind of terrible experience. I am honestly impressed by how cohesive this car is. This drives like something that rolled out of a factory, and that's impressive. That's very impressive. I was talking to Brandon Fitch, who again is both a good friend, full disclosure, and one of the engineers at FM, and I asked, hey, what is this turbo kit going to do to longevity? He was pretty clear that they don't expect to see much, if any, impact to longevity. Obviously that caused me to cock an eyebrow because, hey, you're running boost on an engine that very much was not designed for boost. And to me, that's always a red flag, right? How long are my bearings going to last? How long are my rings going to hold up to any of this stuff? He said he has over 100,000 miles on a turbo NA that FM put together years and years ago, and the thing doesn't use any oil, it doesn't smoke, and as far as I know, that wasn't put together with the same level of care when it comes to engine calibration. The guys were saying that this tune specifically was done by a gentleman who works for one of the big three in Detroit, and his main goal is to apply the same level of finesse and finish to his aftermarket tunes as he does to the stuff that he does during his day job. So this tune has all sorts of safety parameters in line to protect the engine, temperature, lean condition, rich condition, any of that fun stuff. FM doesn't really have to do that, really. They could crank out a good enough tune, and if a couple guys turned their motors to slag, well, that's the cost of playing around with your machine. But the fact that they care enough to do it and do it right has always been a thing that's really impressed me. Well, speaking of Brandon Fitch, look who I found on the side of the road.
Yeah, just randomly.
Good to see you, bud.
Yeah, you too, man. Yeah.
I mean, pretty good, I gotta say. Pretty good. Yeah, man, I was saying earlier, the refinement is awesome.
Yeah.
When we were talking to Jeremy earlier, he was mentioning that, it's so linear, and in the back of my mind, I'm going, yeah, but I want the turbo fun times.
Yes.
And what's impressive is, You know, again, below like 3,000, it feels like a bone stock NC. But there's this insane linear pull, and you still get that turbo bunch.
Yep.
That reminds me a lot of how your NA performs, honestly.
Yeah. This one actually, I think it has way more low end pull than the NA, and the NA are good.
Sure.
I love NAs, all you NA folk. But bigger displacement engine, more mature turbo kit, all that kind of stuff. It is excellent.
So you guys worked on this thing for a long time. I mean, how many months, years?
For better or worse, we counted in years.
Okay,
So two and a half, maybe, something like that. But part of that is we want it to be right.
Yeah.
We want to, bring it out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But right is the priority. We're not going to launch it early just to launch it if it's not finished. So that was part of the reason for the delay.
Well, the old saw, fast, cheap, reliable. Which two do you want?
Exactly.
Yeah. Again, earlier I was sort of rambling to myself about, well, now I've got a real conundrum because for a long time, Betty was on the very top of my do-want list. I mean, of all the cars I've driven, and I've driven some truly batshit cars. But for me, the things that I enjoy, how I enjoy using a car, Betty was, if not number one, damn close. The problem I'm running into
is it a problem, though?
This is very good.
Yeah.
And boy, is this less invasive than putting a V8 in an NC.
Yes, this is a weekend, and it's not cheap, but a chunk of money. The V8 is a massive commitment of time, money, and effort.
One of the struggles that Miatas run into is that they're inexpensive cars to begin with,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So when you start talking about higher level modifications, and a turbo system to me is a higher level modification.
Sure, that's fair.
That's going to get expensive no matter what you're doing.
Yep.
But if you're talking these days, you can't get a clean NA for what this turbo kit costs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So to me, that seems like a pretty good deal.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm ripping around here doing the math, like, okay, so what do I need to kick out of the shed? What can I sell? How much is plasma worth these days?
Yeah.
I don't actually know. But yeah, no, man, it's proper good. You guys should be very proud of this.
Yeah, thank you. We are. It was absolutely a group effort, and we pulled in outside people like Greg with Calibrated Success for the calibration as we needed for different partners and that kind of thing. And we can, since we use different manufacturing partners, you're really good at this, so you make this, and you're really good at that, so you make that. That type of thing to get the best combination, the best complete kit possible.
I mean, to me, that seems like that could be a little challenging, right? Because on the one hand, you guys are Flyin Miata. You've been doing Miatas since there was a Miata.
Right.
You live and breathe them.
Yep.
I'm sure there is a certain amount of swallowing of ego that goes along with reaching out to guys who are very specialized in certain places. Is that true?
Yeah, there's certainly a bit of that for sure. We try to be very aware of that, and we're really good at this, and we're aware of that, but we're not the experts. So let's find the experts in that thing and use their expertise. With Greg, just being an OE level calibrator, the power, the safety, keeping your emissions equipment safe and healthy for a long time. He knows all of those things, and he can build it perfect from the beginning. His very first calibration was probably 90%, and the rest of it was just polishing the little bits.
Unreal.
It was impressive.
Well, and while it may not seem like an NC is a much more advanced car over an NB or an NA, the truth is,
it really is.
It is a considerably more sophisticated vehicle with integrated systems and all sorts of things that you just didn't have to deal with on an NA or an NB.
Yep.
And that sort of rules out a standalone unless you're building a dedicated track car.
Yeah. It's anything's possible and all that business, but there are a lot of compromises to be made.
Yeah.
There are compromises to be made on the NB and then NA, when you go standalone to some extent. But for the NC, a lot more, and for the ND, even more still. If you want a functional street car, that's a lot harder to do with a standalone, never mind the fact that now it's not legal to drive on any road because that's an emissions defeat device.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
So this is a 50 state legal setup.
50 state legal, no funny business.
Aren't you Californians lucky?
Yeah.
So this is tuned for 93?
It's tuned so yes.
Okay.
It's tuned for 93 and 91. Basically, the way the tuning works is we were a little aggressive on the timing for 91.
Okay.
But that's okay because the factory ECU has a really good knock sensor. It's got really good logic in there. So as it kind of tickles the knock sensor a little bit because you're not quite at the highest octane, it's going to be safe. But if you're running 93, you're not going to tickle the knock sensor and you're going to get that extra power.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What do you say?
Well, that's it right there. That big grin, that is what we aim for. That is why we do what we do.
Yeah, nailed it.
Yep.
Absolutely nailed it. It's crazy when you think about, formative life experiences. And if you're watching this, odds are you're a car person. Odds are, like me, so many of your cornerstone memories, the things that make you who you are wrapped up in a car. This car specifically, and the experience at Targa Newfoundland, that is one of those cornerstone moments for me. Those 5-6 days that we spent in this car, not just because it was fun to be competing on open road and the sort of pressure that goes along with that, but I made honest to God lifetime friends on that trip. Brandon, his wife Lee, Keith Tanner, Adam Costa, who shot the Racing the Rock documentary, his wife Tracy. Our kids have grown up together, and all of that hinges on this piece of metal and plastic. That's special. That's incredibly special. And, more special now that it makes turbo noises. Brandon, thank you, man. That was an excellent afternoon. It is awesome to see Nancy still out kicking, and better than ever, you guys have truly done the Lord's work with this machine. Thanks for the afternoon, man. This was awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving us your thoughts on it. A lot of fun from this seat, and it's awesome to see the grin on your face. That is reward in and of itself.
It is a giggle machine. That is absolutely
true.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, man. All right, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
See ya.
Yep.